Hi everyone, I hope today's lecture video finds you well. Uh, for class today, I'd like to discuss a bit about the definition rhetorical mode, because many of you may not be familiar with it, and then talk about how that relates to your first essay, which is coming up very quickly. So, in this whole process for developing your research paper, you've read 3 short stories, and fairly soon I'll be sending you that specific assignment as soon as that discussion is completed. And I've looked over your comments and I made sure that you're doing really well with the discussion and that you're really passionate about whichever story you've picked. That story that you select that will be the foundation of your research paper will also in a way be a foundation for this first essay. Because in this first essay I'm asking you to define what is literature. Now literature is an abstract term. Abstract terms are terms like freedom, democracy, love, hate that mean different things to different people depending on the context. Okay? Take the word love, for example. If you think about the word love, there are many different types of love. There's patriotic love, familial love, romantic love, brotherly love, sometimes referred to as filial love, sisterly love, and on and on and on. People even love vehicles and pets. And I would hope that that sort of love is of a different quality than the love they have for their families. So these terms that are abstractions, they're extremely difficult to define in any clear way. In fact, if you look up some terms like the word human, for example, online, you'll get some strange dictionary definitions that really aren't helpful. In fact, let me look that up right now so I can tell you. If you want to open a search engine as you're watching the video, if you can do that, type in to your search box the word human. Let's see if we get a definition for it. Let's actually write definition of human. There. Okay, I got it. So, definition of human, and if we look at the Merriam-Webster, that's the first one, we get 3 different definitions. And I want you to listen to these because this is also illustrating for you why using a dictionary to write a definition paper is a bad idea. 1, human, of relating to or characteristic of humans. Okay, so what does that mean? How does that help us define what a human is? 2, consisting of humans. Think about that. And 3 is actually split into 2 parts, having human form or attributes, susceptible to or representative of the sympathies and frailties of human nature. Such an inconsistency is very human. So in order to be human, you must have the characteristics of a human. But that doesn't really tell us what the characteristics of a human are, so we don't know any more or any better than before what it means to be human. We don't know how to define that abstraction because there's many characteristics that we share that other animals share, that even machines share now. So it becomes very complex then. So you can see how a definition of an abstraction would be helpful if you wrote a whole essay, let's say 500 words. And literature is one of those ultimate abstractions in that a lot of different people have different opinions on what literature is. In my last lecture video from last week, I read some quotes from Northrop Frye. There's some information in your textbook readings also that address literature. For this week, you should have read the sections on theme and symbol, and there's some short stories in there that I want all of you to read as well, that you may also use as examples to help you support your definition. What I want you to do in this paper is to write an extended definition, what's called an extended definition. If you took 1301 and you managed to keep hold of your successful college writing textbook, there's a great definition of extended definition in here. However, you could explore the term in an essay and explain what it means to you. Such a lengthy, detailed definition is called an extended definitions. Extended definitions are particularly useful in exploring the topic's various meanings and applications. Some extended definitions begin with a brief standard definition that anchors the essay's thesis. Other extended definitions begin by introducing a new way of thinking about the term. Whatever the approach, the remainder of the extended definition then clarifies the term by using one or more other patterns of development. So essentially what it's asking you to do, and what I'm asking you to do, is to define the term literature. This creates a very easy thesis. Literature is this. Literature is that. Whatever you think literature is. If you think literature is defined by something like this, a print source with text, and that's all it is, then you must also think that this is a piece of literature, or that this is a piece of literature, or that this is a piece of literature, or the text that's on your iPhone is a piece of literature. See, that's where it becomes complicated. Most people, when they define something, when they do an extended definition, they talk about the qualities of the object that fits under that abstraction. So all of us associate, an abstract term with a certain object. Love, for example, many people will draw a heart if you ask them to draw what love is, like an image that represents love. So when we think about literature, typically the first image that comes to mind are books. Traditionally, but even what books are have changed radically. If you think about what the Kindle has done for text, for literature, I mean, everything is hyperlinked on the page. So as you're reading, you can click something and get its definition and link to some other information. And so really what literature is has changed there. But we can use that to help us write this definition. We can use that to help us write the definition. We can use that to help us clarify, illustrate for our reader what we think literature is. So your task in this paper that's coming up is to define literature by what you think it is. And I don't mean write a sentence saying, I think literature is such and such. Say literature is a book, or literature is any text that's on the page, or literature has to do more than just be print text. It actually has to speak to an age-old idea or emotion or a universal truth. Some pointers from the Successful College Writing Textbook for 1301 that you may want to remember. Describe the group, or for the standard definition, describe the class as specifically as possible. So what this means is if you're thinking about the term and you want to define it, you want to be as specific as possible in your definition. So literature belongs to what class? Of course, it's a piece of writing, but some people actually think of film as literature because film begins as a screenplay, which is a type of writing. Do not use the term or forms of the term as part of your definition, which we saw in the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of human. They did. So you wouldn't say literature is any piece of literature. How does that help us? Include enough distinguishing characteristics so that your readers will not mistake the term for something similar within the class. So when we're thinking about literature, this is the real challenge for you, is that you have all kinds of books. This is a book. Is this a piece of literature? This is a book. Is this a piece of literature? This is a textbook called literature that we think contains literature, but is everything in the book literature? This is a Surface tablet, which allows me to access, if I choose, see if it'll even start. This thing doesn't always work very well. That's why I prefer my iPad or iPhone, but I use this one for work. When it opens, sometime this century, it'll allow you to access things like Kindle books, because there's an app on here for the Kindle, or Nook books, which is Barnes & Noble's version of the Kindle. See, there we go. Of course, it's upside down. Let me see. Okay. Let's see if I can do this. I think I have the right password. It worked. So you can see here, let me see if I have the Kindle app here. Yeah, so this has all the different apps, and you see it has the Kindle on it. So is this literature? Is a Kindle book literature? This is a book. This is a book. Is that literature? Is literature only words on a page? And so then does anything that has words on a page suddenly become literature? A poster, a sign? Uh, what does it have to include? What does a piece of literature have to include to rise above just being text on a page, to be given more weight? And that's really what your definition is going to deal with. So, you want to be careful not to over-limit the definition, though, in that you create something that's too limited. If you say that a piece of literature must be printed text on a page, well, what about handwritten text? What about some of the stories we have from the late 17th century? If you say literature is always fiction, stories of fiction, well, that leaves out prose, that leaves out plays, that leaves out creative nonfiction, that leaves out most of what we consider literature from about 1900 back, because it really wasn't until the 20th century that literature became dominated by fictional forms or storytelling forms. Most of the literature that we have from the ancient world is actually rhetorical literature, or literature about how to live, speeches. We do have some poetry and some stories and plays, but most of the literature we have from the ancient world is fairly practical. So the idea here is that you have both a narrowing of how you will define the term and a broadening of how you understand it, which seems contradictory, I know. But with an extended definition, you want to go beyond what would be in a dictionary. Don't even look at a dictionary. Don't define it from a dictionary. That's denotation. Denotation does not help us understand that literature at all, because denotation is meaningless, really, when it comes to this. And it doesn't make us think, which is really my primary goal here, is to make you think. Think about connotation. When you hear the word literature, what do you feel? What do people around you feel when they hear the word literature? Do they think all of it's hoity-toity nonsense or a waste of time? Some of you might feel that way, and you're not going to hurt my feelings if you believe that. But some people also think literature is the most important thing on earth, and that it really can change the world, that the written word is probably the most powerful tool we have in contemporary society, and that it forms the foundation of everything else. Somewhere in between, I'm sure, is where most of your opinions are. What is literature? How do you define it? You can take those ideas from the previous video lecture. Northrop Frye states you can take these ideas from your peers. You can interview someone. You'll have to cite it using the personal interview citation that you would find in Writing Matters. 337 gives you a model paper, by the way, so you can make sure your paper is formatted correctly. And that whole section on MLA is, you're going to be using that a lot this semester, and you should be using it. Don't just rely on me to give you those comments. You can use anything that's at your disposal to help you define literature. But what I do expect you to use, and to cite it correctly, is at least the story that you're going to write your research paper on, because you need to have read that story and read it well, read it deeply. What I mean by that is this story is a complex piece of art, otherwise it wouldn't appear in this textbook, and it's representative of what literature should be, what we expect out of literature. So therefore, it's an example that illustrates what literature is. So here's how you can think about it. I want to write a definition, an extended definition, stating that literature can be defined as the written word that originates in the imagination, through which a person may allow another person to share in their imaginative worldview. Something along those lines. That's a rough, very rough draft thesis. I would really parse that down a lot. And Northrop Frye, of course, said that concept far better than I could. So let's try to parse it down a little bit. Let me see if I can say it in a clearer fashion. Literature is a text that allows you to share my imagination. There you go, or the author's imagination. Literature is a text that would allow a reader to enter into an author's mind, to be grammatically correct. Literature is a text that allows a reader, or listener, because we have audiobooks now, so no, how do we do this? Reader, viewer, listener, because film and audiobooks are counting that. Literature is a text that originates in the imagination and allows its consumer, maybe that would work, to share in that imaginative experience. That's a little closer, that's a little nicer. But anyway, I'm just kind of babbling here, but the idea is you got to see a little bit of the thesis process. That's my definition. I know that I'm going to have to prove that literature originates in the imagination. I'm going to need examples, illustrations that show that, and I'm going to need examples of how it helps me to share in an author's imaginative experience. Well, where do you get your examples? Your story. So let's say you read, I don't think I assigned anybody an O. Henry story, but let's say you read O. Henry's Gift of the Magi, and you wanted to prove this. Well, in this story, let's read the summary of it at the beginning. Let's see. Henry sells. Actually, let's pick a story I'm more familiar with. I'm not a big fan of O. Henry, frankly. Yes. Let's pick A Clean, Well-Lit Place by Ernest Hemingway, which, if you've done the theme reading, I believe, are even better. Let's pick Harrison Bergeron. Harrison Bergeron's a great example. Kurt Vonnegut Jr., page 226 in the 13th edition. This is in the theme chapter. And this story is definitely an example of an imaginative story because it's set in what is often referred to as science fiction or speculative fiction. So the first thing I would point out is if literature is an imaginative act that allows me to share in another person's experience, imaginative experience, or something along those lines, I'd word it better, I could look at the story, I could say an excellent example of this is Kurt Vonnegut Jr.'s Harrison Bergeron. In the story, we are propelled into an unspecified, well, we are propelled into the year, it's actually specified, 2081, which at this point is only, it's not that far away, a little over 60 years away, I guess, 70 years away. But is still well over a generation away, maybe 2 generations away. And in Vonnegut's time was even much further than that, perhaps even hundreds of years away, over 100 years away. Now, there's no way that Kurt Vonnegut could have experienced this time. This is purely an act of imagination. Yet, when I read this story, I'm transported to this alternative future. And in this alternative future, Vonnegut makes me suspend my disbelief. Now, that's a great concept to remember. This willing suspension of disbelief. It's key to understanding anything in literature. When we read a story, or go see a movie, or listen to a story, we naturally suspend our disbelief. There is no way, 2081, I mean, there's no way to experience that. There's no way to see, this world is absurd. This world is absolutely absurd, and yet when we read it, we believe it. When we read it, we believe it. We lose ourselves in this. How does the writer do that? There are stories we don't lose ourselves in, but when we read a piece of literature, we lose ourselves. We no longer exist in 2015. You know, we exist in 2081, and everybody is finally equal, as the story says. And we can see George and Hazel Bergeron. We can see them sitting there with their handicaps, as the story says. We can see them with lead balls tied around their necks and giant headphones on their heads that scream every time they have a thought. You know, we can see this, and then we can see them watching the television, and suddenly we're in the characters' heads. And you would talk about how this story does this, or any story that you've read for this assignment, particularly your story that you've selected or been assigned for the research paper. You would talk about how the author uses symbols, how the author uses tone, how the author uses point of view, how the author uses plot. Now, that does not mean you summarize the plot of the story. I do want to point that out. The chapter, in fact, on theme begins with a section called Plot versus Theme. And the last sentence of the first paragraph, the last two sentences, are very helpful for understanding why I don't want to see plot summaries in these papers. No plot summaries. A summary, a brief condensation of the main idea or plot of a literary work, may be helpful, but it tends to focus on the surface events of a story. A theme aims for a deeper and more comprehensive statement of its larger meaning. So just telling me what happens or how the story progresses over time is not the same thing as showing me you understand the story. You know, I can recite to you all the notes in a song, but that doesn't mean I know how the song makes me feel. It's the same sort of thing. Uh, I have to talk about that. What does the song mean? Not what notes make the song. Same thing with stories. People always confuse plot and theme. Summary, no. No summary. No, nada. None. However, pointing to specific events in the story, like when we see Harrison Bergeron rip off his handicaps, and we suddenly see him as this character who's next, just one step below Thor. I mean, where is it? Let me find the sentence here. You may have already found it. It's in the 220s. That must be Harrison. Harrison tore the straps of his handicap harness like wet tissue paper. Think about that descriptive language. Tore straps guaranteed to support 5,000 pounds. Harrison's scrap iron handicaps crashed to the floor. Harrison thrust his thumbs under the bar, the padlock that secured his head harness. The bar snapped like celery. Harrison smashed his headphones and spectacles against the wall. He flung away his rubber ball nose, revealed a man that would have awed Thor, the god of thunder. I mean, that you can quote and you can say, we see this, we follow this, we are watching these events unfold, and it's just text. These are just symbols on the page, but they make us lose ourselves. So, in your definition paper, where do you get your illustrations? You get them from your textbook, from what you have been reading, what I have assigned for you. Now, if you think about this, what that means is if you don't quote anything from the textbook, that is pretty much telling me you haven't read the assignments. So you have to read the assignments in order to write the paper. Very, very important. That's in fact very much a part of the rubric that I will use to grade you. That you somehow illustrate for me that you've been doing the assigned readings. The essay is a big part of that. So here's the summary. I'll give you a summary, even though I don't want it in your paper, of what you need to be doing. You need to be working on, of course, all the assignments in here, including the discussion board where you're showing me and debating and discussing these concepts about these stories and thinking about the 3 stories that you've read and thinking about what you want to write your research paper about. Sometime before the due date, I think I have a specific date in there, I will assign stories for you based on those discussions, and I'll be checking those shortly this afternoon and some tomorrow as well. I think you still have some time with that, though. You need to do that. You need to continue doing the reading and quizzes. But as you are doing those things, you also need to think about this paper, this definition paper, about what is literature, what does it mean, how do you define it, and then how your stories fit that definition. How do they transcend text? How do they force you to lose yourself in the story? Or maybe literature isn't something that causes you to lose yourself. Maybe literature is boring, and that's how you want to define it. That's going to be a tough thing to do, but hey, more power to you if you want to try that. You would have to show how your story is boring, or all 3 stories you've read are boring, and then you'd have to somehow say, well, every story is boring, and show that. You can include all the stories or poems or plays in that. Now, I don't think that's something that's going to be easy to do. Okay, so work on your definition essays. Continue working on this. You do not have to be assigned a story yet to start working on that definition essay. And as a matter of fact, continue working in order, but again, look at that prompt and think about that, because essays take time, and I want you to brainstorm and give yourself plenty of time to create this essay. It's not that far away. Now remember, in the introductory module, I do have some documents to help you with writing, stuff like things that make writing teachers cringe. You should use that to help you proofread as you go. As always, if you have any questions, email me, but please be sure that you've checked the syllabus, you've read the assignment, you've watched these videos before sending email questions. Be sure that you've been taking notes on the things that I'm presenting to you. It's not that I mind answering questions. I'm very happy to answer questions, but I've done, I think, spent a lot of time creating these documents and these videos to help you have the answers you need. So please avail yourself of those resources. But again, after doing so, if you still have questions or you want some support, email me on here, and I will be probably out of commission this Friday through early morning Monday. So if you don't get a response, if you email me Friday at all and you don't get a response until Monday evening, Monday afternoon, please don't panic or be upset. I have some stuff going on, so I'm going to deal with that and then be back on the computer to work with you all. So have a great weekend, rest of your week, and enjoy the readings, and I look forward to looking at your discussions on the discussion board.